there, I'm Shelley Gray and welcome to the Subtraction Station support video. Now if you are watching this, you've most likely arrived through a link in the Subtraction Station PDF file. Thank you for watching this. I really think it's going to help you feel less overwhelmed by all of the information in that file. Sometimes it's nice to be able to sit and listen to something rather than, reading through pages and pages and pages. And I know I've included a lot of information in that PDF file, so I think you'll find this very useful. Now, one thing that I did want to mention is that if you are currently, or if you've in the past used my other math stations, such as the multiplication station, division station, or the addition station, this video will be repetitive. This is the same familiar format that you are used to if you've used my other stations. And I really don't even think it's necessary for you to watch this because it works the exact same way as the other stations do. So with that, I just want to give you a little bit of a backstory for how the subtraction station came about. So in my very first year teaching, I was coming up to the multiplication unit and was unsure how I was going to approach it with my grade 3 and 4 class. So I had a lot of range of ability, and honestly I had no idea how I was going to teach so that I was appealing to all of those different ability levels. So I came up with this little system. At the time I called it the multiplication box, and it was basically just a series of leveled activities that the kids would work through at their own pace, and much to my surprise, they just loved it. They were so into multiplication, and even my students that didn't really like most math related things, they just adored the multiplication box. So over the years, I refined that system, made it better and better and better, and made it available to others to begin using in their classrooms. Currently, that station is being used by thousands of teachers. I get emails almost every day with just fantastic results that their students are seeing. So over the years, I've just had so many requests for stations for other operations. So I did develop addition stations, and then most recently a division station, and now I am really, really excited to introduce you to the subtraction station. So some of the biggest compliments that I've received regarding the math stations really, most of them revolve around confidence. Students that did not possess confidence when it came to math, now they do after using these self-paced stations. They feel good about themselves, they feel smart, they feel successful, and they feel excited to learn, which is so amazing. Now, both the addition and the subtraction stations focus more on mental math strategy and a little bit less on the actual fact knowledge. So if you've used the multiplication station, you know that it was very fact-based. Of course, there was a lot of strategies woven into that, but a lot of it revolved around memorizing those facts using certain strategies. Now, the addition and subtraction is a little bit different because we want our students to possess a really great knowledge of those strategies that they can use to solve any equation that they come upon. So what are the big goals of the subtraction station? Well, the biggest goals are that students are excited about their learning, and they are confident, and they feel successful. And that happens because there are principles of student engagement woven into these math stations. Now, in my experience, students need a few things to feel really engaged in what they're doing. And they need, those things are power, freedom, fun, and choice. And so these math stations integrate those principles to make students feel really, really engaged. Now, this is the reason that you hear about or experience in your classrooms, if you've already used this, students who are so excited and literally are begging you to do subtraction or addition or multiplication or whichever operation you're working on, because they get those feelings of having some power and having some choice and fun and freedom, and it feels really good. That's why these are so engaging. So that is a really big goal of the subtraction station. Now, the other big goal is to teach students a whole bunch of strategies that they can use. And these are not just strategies that are going to work in one grade level. These are strategies that they can keep with them all throughout their school careers. So I like to refer to strategies like tools. And every time you learn a new strategy, it's like putting a new tool in your toolbox. So when you encounter an equation, wherever it may be, you can grab whichever tool works the best and use it to solve that equation. So another big goal of the subtraction station is that we are teaching each student to his or her full potential, and each student is being appropriately challenged for their unique abilities. So we know that in any given classroom of say 25 students, we've got some at the low end, some at the high end, and then a whole bunch in the middle. So the subtraction station makes it easy to differentiate to all those different ability levels, and you truly can target every single student at the appropriate level. Okay, so you might be wondering, well, what do students do? How does it actually work in your classroom? So I want to just give you a quick overview of exactly what's going to be happening, what are students actually doing. So first things first, you are going to have a box. Now I have this plastic box that I bought at Walmart for about $15, but honestly you can use a cardboard box, just anything as long as it fits letter-sized file folders. That's the important part. Now inside the box you have a whole bunch of file folders, and inside each file folder are activities, and the students are literally just going to start at the beginning and they're going to work through each level of activities. Now each level focuses on a different strategy. Okay, so you're going to start, depending on the level of the station that you're using, it might be a little bit different, but you'll start with the easy facts and the easy strategies, and then the students will move along to the more difficult ones. Now they can move at any pace because they are doing all of the work here. You are really a facilitator, which is really, really cool to be able to be a facilitator for your students and watch them be so responsible for their own learning. So they're going to start at the beginning, and they're going to start with level 1, and they're going to do the activity that's in the level 1 folder. They're going to self-check. You don't do any marking here. They make the corrections if there are any. They put the answer keys back in the folder. They fill out their assessment tracker, and they get the next activity. And this is how the subtraction station works. So it's very routine. After about a week, you'll notice that your students know exactly what to do, and that's when you'll really move from a teacher role to a facilitator role, because your students are truly responsible for their own learning, and they are taking care of their learning here. It's a great thing to see. Now, within each level that students work through, there are some really important pedagogical principles woven in. So I focus on two things in each level. The first thing is isolation, and the second thing is integration. So in every level, you're going to find, first of all, a new strategy that is isolated. And by isolated, I mean that students are working on only that one strategy. They're really focusing on one strategy so that they can master it before they get other strategies integrated in. Okay, so that's the first few activities in each level are the isolation activities. At the end of each level is an integration activity. Now this is where they've already learned the new strategy. Now they are going to integrate it with what they already know. So for example, in level 4, first of all, they will be isolating one strategy, whichever strategy they're learning in level 4. Now at the end of level 4, now they're going to integrate that new strategy with the ones that they learned in level 1, 2, and 3. So that's how the isolation and integration works. When they are doing the integration activities, they are focusing on which strategy works the best. So I say 2 words a lot in my classrooms, and those words are effective and efficient. So I always like to be asking my students which strategy was the most effective, or which one worked the best, and which one was the most efficient, right? Which one was fastest, because you want to be fast and you want your strategies to work well. So I use those 2 words a whole lot. So you'll find in the integration activities, you want to be encouraging your students to use whatever strategy is effective and efficient for that particular equation. The entire station starts pretty easy, but it does get more difficult. Now, it's really, really important that your students start with the easy activities, even if you think they could, skip through the first few levels. It's important to start easy because that's where you build a lot of confidence. So a lot of your students that don't like math, they probably don't like it because they don't feel like they're any good at it. So we want to take the time to make our students feel really good about their abilities, and which in turn is going to make them feel very smart, and that will encourage them to actually enjoy math. So we want to start with the very first level, which is easy. It's all about subtracting 0, and then we move on from there. Now the levels get pretty tough in the subtraction station. Subtraction is hard, right? That's why your students struggle with it. It's a tough concept. So it will move into more difficult strategies. Now, some of your students realistically are not going to finish all of them, or might not master every single strategy, and that is so okay. Some of your students will, and some of your students are going to need a bit more support. Some of them are going to need to use manipulatives all the way through. Some of them are not going to be really fast at every single fact, and that's so fine. You just want to encourage them to learn as many strategies as they can. So if you have some students that master every strategy, that's awesome. If you have some that master 3 strategies really well, that's still great, right? Your expectations might change for different students. So throughout the subtraction station, there are 2 main types of assessment that you are going to be doing all the time. The first is informal assessment, and the second is formal assessment. So what does informal assessment look like in your classroom? Well, informal assessment is what drives your instruction. So it is what tells you where your students are at and helps you understand where they need to go or how they are going to get there. So this might include just circulating your classroom. You might use the assessment trackers that I included in this package to take notes on a clipboard as you circulate. You might make notes of challenges that certain students are having, or maybe you identify 3 or 4 students that are really struggling with one concept, and you pull those 3 or 4 students for a mini lesson on one strategy. So that's your informal assessment, and that, in my opinion, that's the most important kind of assessment, because that's what tells you where you're headed, and it really helps drive your instruction. Now, formal assessment happens at the end of every level. So when a student completes a level, their assessment tracker will tell them that it's time for a test. Now, I call it a test, but I want you to keep this test as informal as you possibly can. And that's the reason that I haven't provided you with a whole bunch of material for it, because I really don't want this to become a stressful situation for your students. What the test is the student simply approaches you when he's done a level and says, I'm ready for my level 3 test. And you take about 2 minutes with that student face-to-face, right? This is not a pencil and paper test. This is a face-to-face test. And you quiz them on a few of the facts that use that strategy. Now, during the test, you're checking for 2 things. You're checking for automaticity with the facts, and that means that they know the facts really well. The second thing you're checking for is strategy use. Now, you need to be careful, because in the subtraction station, your expectations for automaticity and strategy use might change depending on the level. So for instance, in the using doubles level, so that's a level that uses the doubles facts, the doubles addition facts. In that one, I would expect them to be fairly automatic with their responses, because that's something that I want my students to memorize. I want them to know that 10 subtract 5 is 5 without even really thinking about it. Now, in another level, you might put more emphasis on strategy and less emphasis on automaticity. So for example, let's say, for instance, the final level in the grade 2 is expanding the subtrahend. So that's the second number. That's a pretty tough one. And that's something where you're assessing the strategy more than the fact. Okay, so you're going to have to make those decisions based on each level. Now, I've included in the PDF file some cards. These are quick reference cards that will help you with these formal tests. So all that I've included on the card is a quick outline of the strategy, and then some sample facts that you can use to assess that strategy. So please, as I mentioned before, don't make this test too formal. It's just really a quick check of if your student is able to move on to the next level or not. Now, if you do your quick 2-minute test, and you find that that student, was really comfortable with the strategy, is comfortable with the facts, then he or she is free to move on to the next level. If you feel like that student could do a little better, there's no negative consequence to this. All they need to do is go back to their seat and practice the strategy a little bit more. Or maybe you want to meet with that student for a quick mini lesson, just to help them understand it a little bit more, and then give them a chance to do the test again. So please keep this very positive. Now, if you've watched my other videos, I know I've told this story many times before, but I do like to mention it just because I think it's really important. When I was using the multiplication station, my first year, I had a student who got very anxious every time that he had a test. And he had no reason to be anxious because he was a top student and always knew all of his facts, but he just got that test anxiety. So what I did for him was we walked the hallways together for about a minute while I quizzed him on his facts. And that for him worked. I think just the idea of him coming to my desk and standing there and doing a test was very overwhelming for him, but for some reason walking the halls worked. So I want to encourage you to do that for your students. If you have one or two who get really anxious, find some way that works for them, because you want them to enjoy this. It's very important that they enjoy it and that they're not overwhelmed with anxiety every time that they come to the test part. Now, I mentioned assessment trackers in that last explanation. These are provided for you. So each student is going to have an assessment tracker. You are going to have one as well. Now, the student assessment tracker is really, really important. That's how students track where they are at. So you are not responsible for tracking where every student is at. That's way too much work, right? The students can do that on their own. So they are shading in their assessment tracker, and you might decide that maybe after they do a test, you give them a sticker and they can put the sticker on the test square on the assessment tracker. So that's up to you, but that is really important to make sure that every student has that. Now, mini lessons. I've spoken about mini lessons a little bit as well. These are not, I haven't provided, specific mini lessons for you, but this is just, as I mentioned before, a time that you might pull a couple students and just focus on a certain strategy a little bit more. So you want to keep your mini lessons sometimes maybe to 3 or 4 or 5 students. Now, other times you might decide to do a whole class mini lesson. So maybe you are finding that, you've got students at every level in the subtraction station, but you've got quite a few right now who are on the subtract 9 strategy. So this might be an opportunity for you to do a mini lesson with the whole class on that subtract 9 strategy. Now, it's going to be new for some people and review for others, but that's totally okay. So it's just up to you to structure those mini lessons however it best works for your classroom. So let's talk about assembling the subtraction station. So I really encourage you to get this all done in one shot. I know some people before have mentioned, getting a couple levels done and then letting their students start and then getting the rest finished. You can do that, and if you feel that's going to work okay, that's fine. My preference is to take a few hours and just get it completely set up. And then I don't have to worry if some students are going to fly ahead and be without activities because I haven't made those levels yet. So I really encourage you to set aside a couple hours in the evening or on a weekend and just get this done. And remember that once you do get it all prepared, the subtraction station is going to last you a really long time in your classroom, probably 2 to 3 months depending on the age of the kids that you teach. So if you can just take a few hours and get it complete, that station's finished for the next few months. So it really is worth it, in my opinion. That will also give you a really good overview of all the activities that are included so that you are better able to help your students. Okay, so on to preparation. How do you prepare the subtraction station? So the first thing you need to invest in is a whole bunch of file folders. Now the number of folders varies depending on the level of subtraction station that you have. I like to use the colored file folders. I buy boxes that have 4 colors in it, and then I alternate colors for each level, and that just makes the levels more visual for the students, but quite honestly, that's not necessary. If you don't have colored, that's totally okay. So you're going to need the folders. Now you're going to need to label the folders. So you will notice as you dive into all the material that each activity is labeled with a number and a letter code. So this one, for example, is for A, and on the back it is for B. So for each double-sided activity, you make a folder, and you label that folder with that number, letter, code. So this file folder is labeled 4A and 4B. So inside, I've copied enough of the activities for each student in the class. I've fastened them with a paper clip. That's my personal preference, just to keep them all neat and tidy, but it might not work for you. Now the answer keys are also really important. So the answer keys I put in the folder as well, and you can see that they're labeled 4A and 4B. Now I recommend mounting the answer keys on colored paper, and this makes them stand out so that when a student sees something that's on colored paper and laminated, they know right away that it's an answer key, and it just makes it easier to find. So that, now the answer keys, sorry, if you are not getting your students to self-check, you wouldn't need these, but I highly, highly recommend self-checking. It gives the students more power, gives them more responsibility, and to be very honest, you don't need more marking in your life. You know, you already do enough of that. So this time the work is on the students, and they can actually learn a pile from correcting their own assignments as well, from self-checking. So I highly recommend that you use the answer keys that are included with the subtraction station. All right, so let's talk about introducing this in your classroom. So what I like to do is introduce the subtraction station in small group time. So you might have several small groups in your classroom, and I like to work with 4 or 5 students at a time to introduce the station to them and actually let them know what it's all about. Now the reason that I like to do it in small groups is because then I can let each student touch it and feel it and actually experience it before I expect them to be doing this all independently. So I go through the setup, how it's labeled, the letter number codes as I talked about before. I go over expectations. Now expectations are really, really huge because this has the potential to be a disaster, right? If you just didn't explain it properly to students and didn't explain your expectations. But if you take the time to explain your expectations, they can keep this so well organized that you will never have to reorganize throughout the year at all. So I take the time to teach them exactly what I expect inside each folder. So my personal expectation is that the activity sheets come first, fastened with a paper clip, and then the answer keys come next, and they have to stay in order. So 4A comes before 4B. And all of that stuff stays inside the folder, neat and tidy. I also prefer to get my students to take the entire folder out of the box rather than just like grabbing in and trying to get what they need out of there. And when they put their answer keys back, I also get them to take the whole folder out, put their answer key back, and then stick the whole folder back in. And I find that that helps students not put an answer key back in the wrong folder, stuff like that. So those are things that you're going to figure out as you go along as well. But it helps if you can outline some of those expectations right up front for your students. Now, you cannot take anything for granted when it comes to organization. So even something as simple as taking a paper clip off of a group of papers and putting it back on. Some of your students have probably never used a paper clip before, and that can be really confusing. So during my introduction with small groups, I literally give students a paper clip and get them to practice taking it off of the sheets and putting it back on so that that does not become a big ordeal later when they're working independently on the station. And I know that some of you are just excited to get right into this and would rather just, skip the introduction and get right onto the station. I really, really, really encourage you to not skip those expectations and that introduction stage. It will pay off later on because your students will know what to expect and they will treat the station as you want them to treat it. So it's really worth it to take the time to do that. All right, so let's talk about a typical day. So what actually is going to happen in a typical day when students are using this after the introduction period? So I like to use it during center time. I like a small group of students to be using this at one time rather than the entire class. Now the reason for that is because when students are using the subtraction station, they are going to be getting up and down from their desks, and they are going to be coming over to the station to get the activity that they need or the answer key that they need. And they're going to be going back to their desk, they'll be self-checking, and there'll be a lot going on at this box. Now, if you have 25 students working on it at the same time, you might have 3 or 4 students at any one time who need to come over and get something, get a new activity or an answer key or something. That's a lot of little hands in this box, and something about 6 hands in here at one time really just gets to me. I'd rather have one student in there at a time. So I prefer to use it during centers when you only have maybe 4 to 6 students working on the station at one time. So at any one time, there should just be maybe one person who needs to come get an answer key or needs to get a new activity sheet. That's just how I prefer to use it. Now, what is going to happen during center time? So as I mentioned, students will be getting up and down, and that's a really good thing. It gets your students moving, but this is another instance where you need to set your expectations. So when a student needs a new activity, they go straight to the box and go straight back to their seats. They don't stop to chat with friends, none of that. So you have to be up front with all of those expectations again. So they come, they get an activity, they go back to their seat, they complete the activity, they come to the box, they get the answer key, take it back to their seat, they self-check, and then they mark a spot on their assessment tracker. They put the answer key back, and they start the next activity. And this is how the routine goes every single time that they work on the station. Now, when they get to the end of their level, their assessment tracker will let them know that it's time for a test. And that's when they just find you wherever you are. You take 2 minutes with them, you quickly do their test, give them their sticker, and they're on to the next level. Now, you will have students that fly through this, and maybe some of your students already are really comfortable with subtraction, and they've already been doing it for a while, and they'll fly through. Now, I really encourage you not to make those fast finishers your helpers in the classroom. Don't get them helping, the slower kids. Make sure you're providing them with activities for enrichment. So this might mean higher level equations, higher numbers, or even math projects, or something else that will really engage them. So one of the last aspects that I want to touch on is the parent section in the PDF file. So I've included for you a lot of parent resources, including explanations of each strategy, as well as some sample facts to practice with their children. Now, one thing that I need you to remember is that most of your students' parents probably did not learn math this way when they were a child. And it's new to them, it's unfamiliar, and many have strong opinions why or why not it's a good idea to teach this way. So I need to encourage you to be proactive when it comes to introducing this to your students' families. Now, one thing that I used to do is allocate 5 minutes at the end of every parent-teacher conference to actually teach the parents a couple mental math strategies. And I always had a lot of success with that. So I just teach them a couple strategies and then tell them why mental math is so important, why it works so well, and why it's really important to teach that rather than just a series of steps when it comes to solving equations. So whether it's in your classroom newsletter, on your website, or at parent-teacher conferences, please find some way to be proactive rather than reactive when it comes to talking to your students' families about how you're teaching the math strategies. And lastly, I just wanted to say that if you don't feel that this approach is going to work for you, I really encourage you to try it in your classroom, give it a shot, and see if it really motivates your students. And if it doesn't, feel free to use this resource in any way that you see fit. So you might not actually use this all, in leveled folders as I do. You might just pull sheets here and there and get your students to use them. And of course, that is entirely up to your discretion. I really would love for you to try it as it's laid out. I really think that you'll get good results, and I would love to hear from you. So if you use the subtraction station in your classroom, please feel free to contact me through my Facebook page or through my website. I always love to hear from people who are using my resources. So thank you so much and good luck.